And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we are going to begin setting up our supply and demand model and how we take determinants into account. So this will be our first time through it, so I'm going to take my time. Notice how everything here is set up. I have a supply and demand model with quantity on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis. Here's my downward sloping demand curve. Here's my upward sloping supply curve. I have the current equilibrium price of the good and the current equilibrium quantity of the good. And then over here, I have listed what the good is that we are going to analyze, and we are going to analyze hats. We're going to analyze hats, and then we're going to run our analysis through our model. Now, what do these things mean? This RWE is called our real world event. The DET, this is our determinant. We talked about determinants on the last video. Then we're going to shift curves, and then we're going to say what happens to price and quantity. And then finally, we're going to say what do we call that change on the demand side, and what do we call it on the supply side. So those are all the things that we're going to do. So let's just jump in and do it. So my good's going to be hats. So the first thing that I need to do is I'm going to label on my graph the subscript H to tell me that we're doing hats. So this is the price of hats, and this is the quantity of hats. And currently hats have some price, P1, maybe $20 for a hat. And my quantity is Q1. That's the quantity of hats that are being bought and sold in the market per week or per day or whatever. So maybe 20,000 hats are being bought and sold per week at an equilibrium price of $20. That's what the graph tells me. And then let's say we get a real world event. So our real world event, let's think about World War II. So before World War II, a lot of people wore hats. If you were to, go out on a Sunday walk on the boardwalk down at the beach, everybody would be wearing hats. Okay, they'd be wearing their fedoras or whatever. And then after World War II, this changes. People all of a sudden stop wearing hats. And so what's going to happen to the hat market as a result? Well, first of all, my real world event is soldiers return home. Soldiers return home from the war. Soldiers return home from the war. Now, when the soldiers, I guess, I don't know if it was the conditions of war or whatever that are not, very good for wearing hats. So they come home and they don't really wear hats like people used to. And that determinant that matches up with that real world event then is called a change in taste and preferences. That's just kind of my shorthand right there. It's a change in tastes and preferences. So every single time that there is some real world event, some real thing that happens in the world, as economists, we have to match up a determinant with that real world event. Some determinant in our model that will explain how the curves will shift in response to that real world event. So, prior to World War II, people wore hats at this equilibrium price. People were buying and selling this many hats. After the war, soldiers come home with a change in taste and preferences. They don't like hats as much as they did before. And again, I'm trying to guess why. I don't really know why. That's not what economists do. Economists don't try to figure out why people like hats more or less. That's for, advertisers maybe to figure it out or something. But as economists, we just care about what's going to be the result of that. So if people wear hats less than they did, and it's due to a change in taste and preferences, they just don't like them as much as they used to, that's going to cause the demand curve to shift into the left. The demand for hats will shift into the left. And so there's my demand curve shifting into the left into D2. It's a left shift, decrease demand. And then when the demand curve shifts to the left, the supply curve did not shift. We come across and mark the new price of hats, and we come down and we mark the new quantity of hats. So we would say that when you get a decrease in demand for hats, that will cause a decrease in the price of hats, and that would cause a decrease in the quantity of hats that people are going to buy and sell. Now, this quantity is happening on both sides of the market. If quantity goes down, that means people are buying fewer hats, but it also means that they're selling fewer hats. So we have to use the correct language to describe this change in quantity. Well, on the demand side, the demand curve shifted, so we call that a change in demand. That'd be a change, and in this case, it would specifically be a decrease in demand. That's a decrease in demand. The demand curve shifted to the left. We've used this language before. What happens on the supply side? Well, as the demand shifts into the left, as people want to buy fewer hats than they did before, prices of hats begin to fall. As prices fall, we move along the supply curve. We're going to move along the supply curve. As prices go down, suppliers start to say, well, we're not going to make as many hats as we did before because we can't make as much money. So as the price of hats go down, companies start producing fewer hats, and that is a move along the supply curve. So that decrease in quantity on the supply side is called a decrease in quantity supplied. That's called a decrease in quantity supplied. So that decrease in quantity right there, that gets two names, that decrease in quantity. That is called a decrease in demand on the demand side. There was a shift, and a decrease in quantity supplied because we moved along the supply curve. Okay, this is what economists really care about. This is how we do economics. We get a change in a real world event, and we want to know what happens to price and quantity as a result. Here's our rule for the change in taste and preferences. This is the rule that's always going to be the case. Here's my rule. Anytime there's an increase in preference for a good, the demand curve will shift to the right. Just ignore that there. That should be shift right. And a decrease in preferences for a good causes the demand curve to shift to the left. The demand curve shifts to the left. So increased taste and preferences, demand shifts right. Decrease taste and preferences, demand shifts left. Our example, of course, was a demand curve shifting to the left, causing a lower price and a lower quantity. Okay, we're going to do a lot of these on future videos where we take a real world event and we tell what happens to price and quantity as a result. Okay, so that's our first demand determinant. Hope that helps a little bit. We'll talk more about this on the next podcast. This has been Mr. Hagan, and we'll see you on that next podcast.